To enjoy such a trip along with such a crowd of emigration, a man must be able to endure heat like a salamander, mud and water like a muskrat, dust like a toad, and labor like a jackass. He must learn to eat with his unwashed fingers, drink out of the same vessel as his mules, sleep on the ground when it rains, and share his blanket with vermin and have patience with mosquitoes, who don't know any difference between the face of a man and the face of a mule, but dash without ceremony from one into the other. He must cease to think, except as to where he may find grass and water and a good camping place. It is a hardship without glory, to be sick without a home, to die and be buried like a dog. Anonymous, Oregon-California Trail, 1840s.
Somewhere in the vicinity of Fort Bridger, a small trading post, we met two men from California who tried to persuade us to take the Hastings Cutoff, which they claimed would shorten our journey by several hundred miles. Fortunately, we did not take it. This was the road traveled by the ill-fated Donner Party, then only a few days behind us. We might have shared the same fate, being so anxious to reach our destination, had not our pilot, Old Man Greenwood, strongly advised us not to take the route. Margaret M. Hecox, Green River Valley, Wyoming, July 1846.
The sun was scorching hot as it had been every day except when it was cloudy. We really began to fear that our beasts would not be able to cross this broad valley, for they seemed to be suffering terribly. Our wagon was second in line, but the oxen of our first team were constantly in danger of breaking their horns in the wheels of the preceding wagon because, in trying to keep their heads in the shade, they continually got them between the wheels. Heinrich Leinhard, August 1846, The Great Salt Desert, Utah.
In consequence of rain last night, we're obliged to encamp only 1 mile from last night's camp, a creek here being too high to attempt fording. Last night experienced one of the heaviest rains I ever knew. The storm commenced about 10 o'clock at night with a high wind from the northeast. Most of the tents were blown down, placing the occupants, women, and children in a most pitiful condition. Our tent was well placed and braced and weathered out the storm. The whole atmosphere seemed charged with the electric fluid, and during some 5 hours seemed a continuous blaze. I felt much uneasiness, sleeping in the back part of a tent, at the foot of which were 6 guns with the horns full of powder near them. Pearson B. Reading, June 7, 1843, Plains of Nebraska.
At Fort Hall, General McCarver started out ahead of the train towards the Salmon Falls with a few packers, and on approaching them discovered some Indians, and he saw a red flag hoisted. He formed his men for battle. They marched up towards the Indians, believing they meant to fight. When he got near enough, he discovered that the red flag was a salmon split open and spread out as a sign to the packers that they had salmon for sale. So they marched up and bought some salmon. They had a good deal of fun with McCarver. Nineveh Ford, 1843.
Having ascended about half a mile, a frightful prospect opened before us. Naked mountains whose summits still retain the snows of perhaps 1,000 years. For it had withstood the heat of a long dry summer and ceased to melt for the season. The winds roared, but in the deep dark gulfs, which yawned wide on every side, profound solitude seemed to reign. John Bidwell, October 18, 1841.
We did not say much on parting. Our hearts were too full for that. There was simply a warm clasp of the hand accompanied by the familiar word, goodbye, which we all felt might be the last words we should ever speak to each other. The feeling of loneliness that came over me as the two men turned away, I cannot express, though it will never be forgotten, while the goodbye mows, so sadly and reluctantly spoken, rings in my ears today. Moses Schallenberger, December, 1844, Sierra Nevada Mountains.
The road today was very hilly and rough, At night, we encamped within 1 mile of Fort Hall. Mosquitoes were as thick as flakes in a snowstorm. The poor horses whinnied all night from their bites, and in the morning, the blood was streaming down their sides. Margaret A. Frink, July 11th, 1850.
They were plundered and cheated without mercy. In one bargain concluded in my presence, I calculated the profits that accrued to the fort and found at the lowest estimate they exceeded 1,800%. Francis Parkman, Fort Laramie, Wyoming, summer, 1844.
Our encampment was on the slope of the mountain, and the valley lay spread out at our feet, illuminated sufficiently by the red glare of the moon and the more pallid effulgence of the stars to display imperfectly its broken and frightful barrenness and its solemn desolation. No life, except in the little oasis occupied by our camp, and dampened by the sluggish spring, by excavating which with our hands we had obtained impure water sufficient to quench our own and our animals' thirst, existed as far as the eye could penetrate over mountain and plain. There was no voice of animal, no hum of insect disturbing the tomb-like solemnity. All was silence and death. The atmosphere, chill and frosty, seemed to sympathize with this sepulchral stillness. No wailing or whispering sounds sighed through the chasms of the mountains, or over the gulfy and waterless ravines of the valley. No rustling zephyr swept over the scant dead grass, or disturbed the crumbling leaves of the gnarled and stunted cedars, which seemed to draw a precarious existence from the small patch of damp earth surrounding us. Like the other elements sustaining animal and vegetable life, the wind seemed stagnant and paralyzed by the universal dearth around. I contemplated this scene of dismal and oppressive solitude until the moon sunk behind the mountain, and object after object became shrouded in its shadow. Edwin Bryant. August 3, 1846.